They say in the village of Akorwa, there was a woman who could speak to roots. Not the kind of speaking you do with your mouth, no. The kind that happens in the dark, before dawn, when the world is still deciding what kind of day it wants to be. She would kneel in the wet earth behind her hut, press her palms flat against the ground, and whisper, and the roots would listen. The herbs would rise toward her fingers like children reaching for their mother. The bark would soften, the leaves would turn. Even the river nearby, people saw, would slow its current when Maame Aboraa walked to its edge. She had been doing this for 40 years. 40 years of healing fevers that had killed men in neighboring villages. 40 years of drawing poison from snake bites before the sun could set. 40 years of mixing, grinding, burning, and praying. Her hands always moving, always setting, always right. But certainty, as the elders say, is a pot that cracks the moment you stop watching it. And on the night this story begins, Maame Aboraa stopped watching. It started with a death. Not her death, someone else's. A man named Kofi Mensah, a trader from the eastern quarter of the village, had borrowed seed grain from old Maame Aboraa 3 planting seasons ago. He had promised to return it double. He returned nothing. Not the grain, not a word, not even the courtesy of shame. He simply continued living his life, loud, well-fed, and unbothered, while Maame Aboraah's own store of grain grew thin. She had gone to the village council. The council had yawned. She had sent her granddaughter to knock on his door. Kofi Mensah had laughed and shut the door in the girl's face. She had waited, and waiting for a woman who had spent 40 years being patient with roots and bark and slow-boiling remedies should have come easy. But there is a different kind of waiting. The waiting that lives in your chest like a coal that never quite goes out. That kind of waiting changes a person slowly, the way water changes stone. You do not notice it happening, and then one morning you wake up and the stone is unrecognizable. By the 3rd season of silence from Kofi Mensah, something in Maame Aboraa had shifted. She stopped asking the roots to heal. She started asking them to remember. Now, understand, in the tradition she carried, there were 2 sides to herbal knowledge. The healers called the bright side Nkwa, life, and they called the dark side Owo, death's shadow. Most herbalists spent their whole lives on the bright side. They were taught from childhood, the dark side does not obey. The dark side listens to your anger, not your wisdom. And anger, everyone knows, is a blind man with a machete. Maame Aboraa knew all of this. She had taught all of this to the 2 apprentices who had passed through her compound over the years. And still, on a Tuesday evening, when the fireflies were just beginning to rise and the village was settling into its nightly softness, she knelt beside her clay pot, filled it with the dark herbs she had not touched in 30 years, and she began. She spoke Kofi Mensah's name into the smoke. She described him, his walk, his laugh, the particular way he waved his hand when he was dismissing someone. She pressed a red leaf into the center of the calabash bowl and spoke the words that, once spoken, move on their own. She felt the curse leave her hands the way you feel heat leave a stone at nightfall. Gradual, then complete. She exhaled, and then she looked at the calabash. The red leaf had turned white. White means innocent. Every herbalist on the dark side knows this. Red is for the guilty, the one whose name you called, the one the curse is meant to find. White means the herbs have rejected the name. White means the ancestors looked at your target and said, not this one. White means you called the wrong name. Or and this was the thought that stopped Maame Abora's breath entirely, it means you called the right name, but the curse, moving faster than thought, faster than correction, had already turned a corner and found someone else. She stood up so fast her knees cracked. The smoke was not moving toward the eastern quarter, toward Kofi Mensah's compound, with its well-fed chickens and its painted gate. It was drifting west, slowly, gently, almost tenderly, the way smoke moves when it has found where it is going and has no reason to hurry. West was the Achampong compound. Maame Aboraa pressed both hands over her mouth. The Achampongs, old Awo, who braided her granddaughter's hair every evening and hummed old songs. Little Abena, 7 years old, gap-toothed, who chased the goats through the market square and made the whole village laugh. Kwame, quiet and hardworking, who woke before the roosters. His wife, Ajua, 3 months from delivering their second child. A family that had never wronged Maame Aboraa, not once, nothing. She had cursed the wrong family, and the smoke was already there. For a 71-year-old woman with knees that had been complaining since she was 62, Maame Aboraa ran with a desperation that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with her soul. She crossed the compound, pushed through the narrow path between the 2 old neem trees, and came stumbling into the open space in front of her hut. And there, in the warm amber distance, she could see the light from their champong fire. She could hear Awo humming. She could see the small silhouette of little Abena sitting still while her grandmother's hands moved through her hair. And she could see, though no one else in the village could see it, the faint pale thread of the curse settling over that compound like a second sky. She raised her hand. She opened her mouth. She tried to call it back. The herbs do not return. That is the oldest law. Once released, the dark side does not come back to your hand. It is not a bird. It is not a child who recognizes your voice. It is a thing that has found its direction, and it will finish what your anger started. She stood there in the dark, arm outstretched, fingers trembling, a tear cutting a slow line down her face. And the curse settled. And Awo stopped humming. The first sign came 3 days later. Little Abena woke with a fever that no herb could touch. Maame Aboraa packed her entire bag and walked to the Achampong compound before sunrise. She stayed through the night, grinding, mixing, praying on the bright side now, begging the same ancestors whose laws she had broken to please, please show mercy to this child who had done nothing. The fever broke on the 4th morning. Maame Aboraa wept with relief. But that was not the end. That was only the beginning of the curse revealing itself, the way a storm does not announce its full intention in the first cloud. The following week, Kwame's entire yam harvest rotted overnight. Every single yam. Not diseased, not eaten by pests, simply rotted, as if time had been pressed fast forward into that single field. He stood in his farm and said nothing. Just stood there. The kind of silence that is louder than any cry. The week after that, Adua lost the pregnancy. Maame Aboraa heard this news and did not move for a full day. She sat on her mat, knees drawn to her chest, an old woman made suddenly ancient by guilt, listening to the sound of Adua's grief traveling across the village like something with no end. And then came the twist that broke Maame Aboraa open. Kofi Mensah, the man she had intended to curse, the man who had stolen from her and laughed at her granddaughter and ignored the counsel, that same week won a trading dispute in the next town and came home richer than before. The wrong family suffered, the guilty man prospered, and the herbalist who had set all of this in motion could not undo a single moment of it. That is what anger does. That is what the elders meant. Anger is a blind man with a machete. It does not look before it swings, and it does not stop when you tell it to. On the night Maame Aboraa finally broke, she walked to the Achampong compound carrying nothing. No herbs, no remedies, no gifts, just herself. Old, guilty, terrified,
and the truth. She knocked on the gatepost. Kwame opened it. His eyes were tired in the way that goes deeper than sleep. Aoroa sat inside, her back to the entrance. Little Abena was asleep. Old Awo stood up slowly when she saw who it was. Maame Aboraa did not wait for a greeting. She lowered herself to her knees in the dirt. A herbalist of 40 years, an elder of Akorwa, a woman people bowed to, and she pressed her forehead to the ground.
And she told them everything. The debt, the anger, the dark herbs she had not touched in 30 years, the red leaf that turned white, the smoke drifting west, the moment she ran and could not call it back. She told them she had been there not just as a healer, but as the one responsible for the wound she was trying to close. She told them she had gone back to the ritual site every night since and begged the ancestors to redirect what she had sent. She told them nothing had moved. She told them she was sorry, in a way that the word sorry was never built to carry. The compound was silent when she finished. Kwame stood with his arms folded, jaw tight, eyes glistening with something between grief and fury. Aoroa did not turn around. Old Awo walked slowly to where Maame Aboraa was still kneeling and stood over her for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "Get up." Awo's face was not soft. It was not forgiving in the easy way. It was the face of a woman who had buried a husband, raised children alone, watched her son's harvest turn to rot, held her daughter-in-law through a loss no woman should carry, and was still standing, still choosing what kind of person to be. A woman who kneels in my compound with nothing to offer but the truth. That is not a woman I will leave in the dirt. She reached down and took Maame Abora's hand, and she pulled her to her feet. It did not fix everything. Aoroa did not turn around that night. Kwame did not speak. The yams did not come back. The pregnancy did not return. Some things that break do not reassemble, and both women standing in that compound knew it. But something the curse had not accounted for happened in that moment. Because curses are built from anger, and anger cannot imagine this. The possibility that the people you have wronged might choose, in their own time and on their own terms, to survive you. By the next planting season, Kwame's farm came back stronger than it had ever been. Aoroa conceived again. Abena grew 2 more teeth and resumed chasing the goats through the market. And Maame Aboraa, who burned all the dark herbs on a morning when the wind was blowing east, spent the rest of her years teaching only one thing to every apprentice who sat before her. The herbs remember what your hand touched before they arrived.
A curse sent in anger does not look at faces, it looks for warmth. And the warmest family in the village is rarely the one that wronged you. Maame Aboraa was not a wicked woman. She was a good woman who had been wronged, who grew tired of being patient, who reached for power in a moment of pain. Most of us will never mix dark herbs in a clay pot, but most of us know what it is to say something in anger that found the wrong person. To send a cold shoulder, a harsh word, a withdrawn hand, and watch it land on someone who did not deserve it. The weapon changes, the story does not. The moment you let your pain make your decisions, you have handed a blind man your most powerful tool and told him to aim. Truth, offered without decoration and without bargaining, is the only thing that can walk into a wound and not make it worse. Remember this story the next time you reach for something sharp in a moment of anger. Ask yourself whose compound the smoke is drifting toward, because it is rarely the one you named. This has been the story of Maame Aboraa, the herbalist of Akorwa, who cursed the wrong family and could not take it back. May her lesson travel further than her mistake. If this story found you today, it found you for a reason. Share it with someone who needs to hear it.